There are many different types of relationships that people can have, but professional relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, and every other type of relationship between people all have one thing in common. They distract us from our relationship with God, so we must end all relationships immediately. You see, every minute we spend with other people, talking, laughing, sharing, is a minute that we're not spending with God, who created us and wants to spend time with us. True Christians should end all friendships, engagements, and marriages immediately and isolate themselves from other people so that time will only be spent in the presence of God. Because relationships aren't a natural part of life on earth that help us learn to communicate with and love other people. They were created by the devil to keep us from being good Christians. These have been Deep Thoughts from a Shallow Christian.
Now, obviously, the video is a little tongue-in-cheek. It's saying the opposite of what is true. God has created humans to be in relationships with one another. As C.S. Lewis said, friendship is unnecessary, like philosophy and like art. It has no survival value. Rather, it is one of those things that give value to survival. And regardless of the level of intimacy you have with others, we have lots of relationships, don't we? We have close friends who live here in Lexington, who we speak to and we interact with regularly. We have close friends who live elsewhere that we keep in contact with as much as possible. We have coworkers that we see almost every day that we may or may not like. We have neighbors that we might give as little as a nod to or as much as an invite to dinner. We have cashiers at a certain store we frequent that we may know by name. We have strangers that we interact with while we're running errands. We have lots of relationships at varying levels with people. And in this Recharge series, I've been challenging us to reevaluate our relationships to see how we might improve them, as well as improve our spiritual depth. After beginning with our relationship with God and moving toward our relationship with our family, today I want to talk about our relationship with the world. And throughout the series, I've been challenging us to stop something and instead connect to a spiritual discipline in order to recharge the relationship. And when it comes to our relationship with the world, I think we should stop two things. We need to stop fighting with the world with an us against them mentality. And we need to stop selfishly trying to get something out of our relationships. The second one, the stop selfishly trying to get something, reminds me of a little story. The old friend asked, "Why were you so rude to that young man?" Well, the old man answered, "Well, if I'd given him the time of the day, he'd want to know where I'm going. And then we might talk about our interests. And if we did that, he might invite himself to my house for dinner. And if he came to my house, he would meet my lovely daughter. And if he met her, they would both fall in love. And frankly, I don't want my daughter marrying someone who can't afford to watch." And sometimes we approach our relationships with others like that, don't we? We evaluate the pros and cons to a relationship, and we decide if we aren't getting enough in return on our investment, then maybe we should just sever the relationship. But that view completely misses God's intentions for friendships. Friendships and other relationships here on earth are not just for us and what we will get out of them. And granted, we like good company. We like being around those people who are encouraging, who are entertaining, who are enjoyable. But friendship is not just about what you're going to get out of it. It's about what you put into it. And sometimes making those friendships is hard work.
My dog is Granny. You sure are doing some high-powered rocking?
I'm doing some high-powered thinking. Thinking and rocking goes together.
Well, tell me, Granny, what is this problem that's got you to rocking so?
It's us, kid. We don't belong out here. These la-di-da city folks don't want our kind around.
Well, whatever put that notion in your head?
Well, here it is pert near Christmas. Back home, folks should be stopping by, passing the time of day, fetching presents, and hefting a friendly jug with us.
Well, you got to remember one thing, Granny. Back home, we knowed everybody, and everybody knowed us. Out here, we ain't much acquainted yet.
You can't get acquainted with these folks out here. I've been trying all morning. I put on my friendly hat, wrung out my rocker, and a jug of hard cider, and I've been sitting here waving and hollering at folks and pointing to my jug.
And nobody stopped?
Only a policeman. That's where my jug went. He took it to the police station.
I bet you got a bunch of friends down there by now.
Might as well face it, Jed. We ain't got as many friends out here as a horse has toes.
Sometimes it's hard to cultivate relationships. Sometimes it's especially hard to cultivate them with the irritating and the annoying. It's hard to invest in people when they seem uninterested and ungrateful. And it seems like a waste of time to make friends with people who have no common interests with us. And yet, God is calling us to befriend one another. Not for what we get out of the relationship, but for what we can give. I love the story of Ruth and Naomi from the Bible. Here's Ruth, this daughter-in-law to Naomi, and all the husbands died. And Naomi gave her free rein to go back to her homeland, back to her own people, the place she felt comfortable. Naomi had nothing to give her, nothing to offer her, nothing to keep her there. But in those iconic words, Ruth proclaimed the attitude that we as Christians should have towards our relationships. Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. And so as we go through our days and interact with people, may we see them not as resources, but as people in need of redemption. And just as important as avoiding selfish attitudes in our relationships, we also need to change our attitude about the world. Now, typically when I hear ministers talk about the world, they cast it in an us versus them mentality, as though we're constantly fighting against the influence of the world in our lives. If you spend any amount of time in church, you'll hear the phrase, in the world, but not of the world. This concept comes from Jesus' prayer in John 17. Jesus says, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, for they are not of the world any more than I am of the world. And while I agree that we need to be careful not to let immorality impinge upon our holiness, we also can't completely separate ourselves from the world. Because Jesus continues, my prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from evil. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. Did you catch that? Jesus didn't pray that we just sort of exist in this world, waiting to be taken up to heaven. For Jesus, being not of the world is not the destination. It's the starting place. It's where things are moving toward. It's not what they're moving towards, what they're moving from. Jesus understood that we have a heavenly heritage that we look forward to. But we're doing more than just biding our time in this world. Jesus is not asking his Father to take his disciples out of the world. He's praying for them as they are sent into the world. Jesus is saying that we have a purpose here on this earth. We have a reason for existing in the world. And you know what that purpose is? To reconcile people to God. To foster relationships with other people that can help initiate a relationship with their Heavenly Father. It says we're being sanctified. It's just a church word for making holy or to set apart for a purpose. And Jesus' true followers have not only been crucified to the world, but they've been raised to a new life. And they've been sent back into the world to free others. We've been rescued from the darkness and given the light, not merely to flee the darkness. Instead of fighting against this world and using relationships just for what we can get out of them, we can recharge our relationship with the world by serving. That's what we connect to, investing in others through love and service. What I'm talking about here is what they call relationship evangelism. Now, typically when I hear the word evangelism, I think about converting someone to Jesus. Norman Cates shared the humorous story of a guy who prayed this prayer every morning. Lord, if you want me to witness to somebody today, please give me a sign to show me who it is. And one day he found himself on a bus, and a big burly man sat down next to him. The bus was nearly empty, but this guy was sitting right next to our praying friend. And the timid Christian anxiously waited for his stop so he could exit the bus. But before he could get very nervous about the man next to him, the guy burst into tears and began to weep. And he cried out with a loud voice, I need to be saved. I'm a lost sinner and I need the Lord. Won't somebody tell me how to be saved? He turned to the Christian and he pleaded, can you show me how to be saved? And the believer immediately bowed his head and prayed, Lord, is this a sign? But that sort of evangelism is not what we're talking about here. Churches talk about witnessing all the time. We say we need to go out and we need to save the lost. We need to win people to the Lord. Let's be honest. Situations like the one in that story rarely come our way. And even if they do, most of us are scared and that we won't know what to say. We won't be able to answer all their questions. So instead, we either avoid the subject of a relationship with God, or we just invite them to church, hoping that church will answer all of their questions. But from what I've observed, that doesn't work all that well either, does it? And the days of walking up to people and convincing them that they need Jesus, they're mostly gone. Instead, our opportunities come in the day-to-day interaction with friends and acquaintances. That is relationship evangelism. It's accomplished through loving and serving. You know, we stop looking at our friends as people who need to be saved. They're people who need to be loved and served. Too often we try to take the role of the Holy Spirit. And while berating someone into a conversion doesn't work all that well, you know what does work well? Building relationships with people, loving people, modeling the life of Jesus for them. Every day we encounter various people in the course of our daily lives, and the life of simple love is lived before them. If they're in need, we help them. We perform small acts of kindness and ordinary neighborliness, sharing food, babysitting children, mowing their lawns, visiting over important and unimportant matters, sharing our tools. No task is too small or too trifling. Each is an opportunity to live in service. And why do we do such things? Out of love, and the understanding that more people are won to the Lord by love than by a convincing argument.
I guess it started one morning. I was sitting in church, just a regular Sunday morning, and the pastor was talking about missions and long-term and commitment and all of these kinds of things. And I guess normally that would impact me a little bit, but this time it was different somehow. It was like God was pounding on my chest, and I just got this huge smile on my face, and I was ready. I just started looking at my life and asking myself, what would it look like for me to be on mission all the time and devote my life to that and become a missionary, I guess. I remember growing up in church that missionaries would come visit. I was just always captivated by their stories, and I knew that there was a world that was so much bigger than my backyard, and that there were people in that world who needed to hear about Jesus. And I've always wanted to get out there and have the ability to tell people about Jesus and see that transform lives. I just kept hearing the same words: planting seeds, nurture, water, tend, person by person, life by life. Don't wait. You're ready. Just go. I felt like I was kind of waiting around, like, is this something that God would call me into? And when would that happen? Where would I go? What would it look like? And then all of a sudden, it was like this lightning bolt, like, there it is. There it is. It seemed almost obvious. Some help?
Yeah, I just gotta put this in there. Thanks.
You want to grab the top?
All right.
My name is Bradley Martin, and I am answering God's call to go. And I am a missionary.
Being a missionary doesn't mean traveling halfway across the world to reach a different people group. It means going next door to your neighbor and helping him plant flowers. And that's the call for all of us, to develop these sorts of relationships and be missionaries in that way. Because as we invest in people, I truly believe that the Spirit works in their hearts and makes them more open to hearing the gospel message. Because they can see firsthand the effect that the gospel has had on you. It's no longer a theoretical faith. They see what that faith can do because it's right before their very eyes. And understand that as you serve people, you earn the right to talk to them. And when you do, you have to be ready. Paul says in Colossians, let your conversations always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer each person. The key word here is conversation. Conversation means I talk and you listen, and then you talk and I listen. Conversation means we share stories. It means that together we move along an unpredictable path of mutual concern and compassion. We navigate twists and turns along the way and rocks and roots, and it may cause us to stumble. But we also savor the company of a good friend. But what I'm talking about is a significant investment with no guarantee of return. If it were a business, we wouldn't think of taking such a risk. But it's not a business. It's a relationship with the world. It's a friendship with eternal consequences. I read a quotation that said, some people make enemies instead of friends because it's less trouble. And if we have that attitude, we are not engaging the purpose God has called us to. Such an investment takes time and effort and is risky. But that is how most people in our culture come to faith. As Proverbs 17:17 says so succinctly, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Jesus is the perfect example of what a friend should be: loving, serving, sacrificial. Listen to his words as his life was coming to an end. Just before his arrest and crucifixion, he said to his disciples, my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. For everything I have learned from my Father I have made known to you. There's no greater act of love than serving other people, by sacrificing for them, by putting them first. I mean, if anyone could have looked around and thought, these people exist for my benefit, it was Jesus. But he didn't. He said, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. And friends love. Friends serve. Friends put each other first. Friends do not look to take advantage of each other. As I look through the Bible, I see all sorts of relationships modeled for us. Jonathan and David were willing to sacrifice for each other. Nathan was willing to confront David in love. Barnabas was a friend to Saul who encouraged and came alongside him. Jethro was a father figure to Moses that made him a better leader. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were faithful friends who stuck together even through a crisis. The Bible is full of people who intentionally poured themselves into one another because they understood that friends do not enter into relationships for what they will get out of it. That's a worldly view that we do not share. As Christians, we should see relationships with this world in a much different light. We should see our relationship with the world as opportunities to reunite long-lost family members. We enter into friendships with people with the final goal of reconciling them with their Heavenly Father. And if we want to be right with God, if we want to grow as Christians, then we need to recharge our relationship with this world by embracing a life of servanthood. That's what evangelism looks like. Evangelism is about cultivating relationships with friends, with neighbors, even with complete strangers. Becoming for them someone who encourages, who sacrifices, and at times tells the truth that they don't want to hear. And it begins by choosing to love them no matter the cost. To move past being friendly and cordial and nice, and instead taking seriously the discipline of servanthood, placing ourselves under them for their benefit. This morning, I pray that God has put someone on your heart, someone that you can invest in, that you can love, that you can serve. Whether it's someone you know well or someone you barely know. May God take our small investment and multiply it. May God take our acts of love and service and use them to restore relationships. This morning, consider those people in your lives. Consider those who you have the opportunity to invest in. May God recharge that relationship. And as he does, change their lives and yours. We invite you to stand and sing with us this morning.